The fire I get to share with you today is some of the best fire. This is one of the oldest stories, one of the most important myths, a myth that lays the groundwork, the fundamental blueprint for what so many myths would become after it. This story is older than any Greek philosopher, older than the Hebrew Bible, older than the pyramids of Egypt. This story is the myth of the Descent of Inanna. This is in my top 3 to 5 myths of all time. There's so much to unpack here, but I have a very simple agenda for us. I want to talk quickly about who Inanna was. Then I'm going to tell you this part of the story about the descent. One version of it, anyways, as there are many contradicting stories that weave in and out of it. And then I'm going to tell you 3 things I think we can and should learn from this myth. One thing I would love for you to consider as I tell you this story is try to think about the motivations of Inanna. I don't want to give too much away or show you my bias or preference here, but she goes into the underworld, into a world of darkness. Why does she do this? She is the queen of heaven. What is she missing? Does she do it to control it? Does she do it to conquer it or to escape it? The view I like the most is that she goes to go. It's something to do. It's something new to understand. I think she goes to the dark to comprehend it. But let me know your thoughts as you hear the story unwind. So, who is Inanna? She comes from one of the first societies, Mesopotamia. The Sumerian myth is where we get Inanna. She is the goddess of many things. She is very well-rounded. She is the goddess of love, beauty, sexuality, war, politics, justice, and storms. Love a good storm god. So no, she is not a single lane deity. In this way, she is the full spectrum of human emotion and intensity, creation and destruction, tenderness and ferocity, a true queen of heaven. We can see this powerful queenly role. She is the predecessor for, again, so many that come after. You've probably heard of Ishtar, the Babylonian version that often they get mixed together, Inanna, Ishtar. But Inanna, the Sumerian, is the first. Astarte from the Canaanite pantheon definitely gets influence from Inanna. And then a lot from the Greek. I mean, in some sense you have Aphrodite, but also aspects of Hera, Athena, and Persephone. And just how cool to be at the beginning. I mean, some of the oldest religious literature on earth. So again, if you're holding your Egyptian Book of the Dead or your Hebrew Old Testament, you're holding something after the fact. Let's go to the beginning. So as I start to tell you this story, some context for how religion or the mythology of the day was working. These are flawed gods. This is true for most pantheons because you need the personalities, you need the interplay. So gods are human-like. They're passionate, they're vulnerable, wrathful, or tricksters, or again, anything positive or negative. The gods were a mirror to the human condition. Again, they were really believed in, but they were used to tell moral tales, to give warnings, to give hope, to give normalcy, voice to what people were thinking and feeling, afraid of and desiring. So keep all of that in mind, because the most interesting thing about the story of the Descent of Inanna is that it is the first recorded resurrection tale that we as a human species have. And I think that that is unbelievably and incredibly fascinating and significant. That predates Osiris, Dionysus, Persephone, and Jesus, and countless others. The people, the humanity in the world, once they were able to contemplate their death and question then why their life, what the purpose, what the meaning, is death truly final, what happens when you cross over, and most importantly, can you ever come back? Bam, as soon as we can record the answer, we do, or unanswer. Many times we think that, this is the start of civilization. It's the start of recorded civilization, but what's so cool is the second we have these instruments, cuneiform, to take note, to write, we see fully fleshed out and developed ideas from mankind, which suggests to me, of course, that we as people, as humans, Homo sapiens, have always been thinking and dealing and telling these stories. So it's not the first, but it's the first that we know of, and it's much older than a lot of the other ones we give more credit or credence to. And so with that stage set, let me tell you the story of the Descent of Inanna. So this particular story opens with Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, at the height of her power. She has everything that she could desire, and yet she makes that very strange choice to go down into Kur, the underworld, the darkness. Kur is a place where she doesn't have the same power. And it makes a lot more sense, again, in a pantheon, because it is her sister, Ereshkigal, who rules this domain. Now, it's not the point of this channel, but keep in mind the connections here specifically with some of the Greek myths that I talked about, even the Egyptian one, but the story of Jesus. An underworld that has dominion by someone who is not one of the most powerful gods. Starting to sound a bit Paradise Lost, right? Now, certain iterations of the tale do try to give us some reasons to why she has gone down. The first one is that we see her there to pay her respects or to mourn with her sister who just lost her husband. Gugalana has died. But that seems obvious that it's more of a initial reason to get her foot in the door. It's been suggested that she's there to actually challenge her sister for dominion over this place. Again, taking the keys to death and Hades kind of thing. Maybe she's there just to confront her shadow side, to see if she can peer into the abyss, into the darkness itself, and come out untouched. Or maybe it's because she is simply Inanna, the goddess who desires all the realms, someone that wanted to fully comprehend the universe that she was a part of and in many ways in charge of. I think not being able to pinpoint her exact reasoning is part of the power of the myth. She adorns herself with 7 sacred May, spelled M-E, but I think May is the correct pronunciation. These are divine powers and symbols of her authority. So you have her crown, her lapis earrings, her breastplate, her golden necklace, her royal robe, her lapis measuring rod and line, and then what is referred to as her royal garment of ladyship. This is the equivalent of a queen donning full regalia before entering a courtroom of some rival power. We could do an entire episode on the 7 May, but quickly, they represent, again, it's all symbolic here. Kingship, music, sexual fertility, battle, priesthood, just her identity at large. Also important to note, she has a very loyal servant, Ninshubur, who all throughout the Sumerian tellings is always female, but by the time it gets to the Akkadians, this messenger type helper servant turns male. There's actually a lot of interesting gender dynamics within these older tales. It's thought that they, in the Sumerians, had 3 different genders, but as it got translated in all of these other places, it gets lost because of the male or female that had to be chosen from the other writing systems of these other cultures. In some iterations, it is actually Inanna herself who has the power to change male to female and female to male. And then there's one more genderless point that comes up here in the story that helps fix a problem. But anyways, in this story, her female maidservant Ninshubur is rather important, and we have a quote from Inanna to Ninshubur. She says, "If I do not return in 3 days' time, call on the great gods. Do not let me be forgotten." Now, I love this line. First of all, it's the acknowledgement of the other power, the great gods besides herself. We'll be introduced to them in just a second. 2, it shows that she's not omnipotent nor omniscient. She doesn't know what's going to happen when she descends. And then that last part, do not let me be forgotten. What more is a representation of the human dilemma of the heart than facing death, darkness, the underworld, and telling someone not to forget you, clearly voicing the desire not to be lost to time. How I love this myth. So we have real stakes. Inanna might not be coming back. And I hope that you enjoy this, by the way. I know that I'm just telling a tale here. I'm trying to help out by giving you some tips at the end as well as some good context at the beginning. Tell me if you like this structure. If you like hearing about myth and you have not yet subscribed and turned on the bell notification, would you please do so? For the most part, I stopped showing this on my other channel. I'll probably share some like this. I know many people are interested in the story of Inanna, but generally speaking, this channel's kind of on its own now. And I don't mind starting over and growing something from scratch, but I need your guys' help. So subscribe if you have not, share, comment, like, do all the things, watch it all the way through, click another Sharing Fire episode afterwards, let the algorithm know, yes, this is a go. Okay, but she descends into the underworld. She announces her presence and her reason, even though it's probably not the real one, that she is here to observe the funeral rites for Gugalana. Then we meet Ereshkigal's gatekeeper, Nettie. Nettie is skeptical. After all, the underworld is rigid and suspicious and hostile toward visitors. So he informs Ereshkigal, who responds like this: let her be stripped of her glory at each gate. There's 7 gates. Let her enter bowed and humble. It's lines like this from Ereshkigal that we see maybe a perceived envy. Sisters, but one gets the light, the queen of heaven, the other rules the dark. Again, whether it is Hades or Satan or the devil or all the other characters that we get in all the other mythologies and stories, we see kind of that same similar. The underworld is powerful, but not as powerful. The underworld is ruled, but is it better to be among the light, to be with the other council of gods, than the position that those in charge of what comes after have been left in? And because of this request, we get one of mythology's most iconic scenes, I think. To me, this is just as great as the moment that Prometheus finally steals the fire and heads back down Olympus. But here we have the 7 gates of the underworld. Distrusting sisters, light versus dark, the living versus the dead. And before Inanna can truly go in and witness and comprehend and discover and or conquer whatever her goals may be, she has to lose. She has to lose a part of herself at each of these 7 gates. How it plays out is that at each stop, at each gate, she removes one of her pieces of regala, one of her may. At every gate, Inanna seems confused or curious. What is this? She repeats. Nettie responds, be silent, Inanna. The ways of the underworld are perfect. They may not be questioned. Again, man, we could unpack that. I think it goes and stretches so far. So, by the time she gets through all 7 gates and reaches the throne room of Ereshkigal, this Queen of Heaven is now naked, bowed, stripped of all power. Again, just to connect some of these dots for you, when we're talking about the Christian stories, to me, this seems very much like Jesus's journey to Golgotha, the place of the skull, the hill where he will be put up on his cross. He is bent over. He is stripped. This entire sequence in these stories and all the others connected to it are rich with meaning and symbolism and metaphor, especially considering that we need to keep the place in mind. This is where one meets death, the end, finality, darkness, lifelessness. So some of this symbolism, I think what it suggests is the loss of the May is like ego death, or ego dissolution. Piece by piece, you lose not only what gave you power, but what was your identity. You lose control. It also echoes many initiation rituals in the hero journey's death stage and many later mystery religions and traditions. Also, when you look at Near Eastern punishment rituals, it mirrors that pretty well, which brings into question, what is the gripe with the underworld toward the Queen of Heaven? What is she guilty of in their eyes? Because again, this looks an awfully lot like punishment. And more than anything, I think it just represents the universal truth of what we think we can know about death. You don't get to take anything with you, at least not your life or identity. And yes, in other mythologies, specifically, I'm thinking Egyptian, you do try to take things with you and hold on to power or position that you had. But that again only shows this to be the harsher reality of the truth of how people thought about this or guessed about this. Even the Queen of Heaven loses who she is and her power as she enters what is the great common denominator, the great equalizer, death. There's underworld judges here, and as Inanna stands before Ereshkigal, they immediately come upon the verdict: guilty. And she is struck dead. I think it's interesting that we get a lot of build-up in the stories. There are some where we could definitely go into more detail here, but there's so much build-up. Her adorning herself and then losing that as she goes through the gates. She's in the throne room. We have the face-to-face. We have the judges of hell, essentially. And it is found that her life must be taken. And in an instant, she's dead. And now kind of part 2 of the story happens, and we'll cover it really quick. But I just think it's so interesting what is shown to be focused on by time or word count or however you want to do it. Her corpse is hung up on a hook. In some translations, it says meat hook. Again, a lowering of who this queen was. She's just meat. Guess how long she's there, by the way? 3 days and 3 nights. And this kind of imagery just ripples through future mythologies, whether it's Osiris being hacked apart and then reassembled, Dionysus torn and reborn, Persephone's return cycle, or the Christian Jesus 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. Though if you just look at the time, that's not how long it was. Inanna is the first of these. She is the prototype. But now that she has been dead for 3 days and 3 nights, do you remember her instructions to her servant? To go to the great gods and not to let her be forgotten. So Ninshebur does what she has been instructed to do. And she goes to 3 of these great gods. First up is Enlil, a god of wind, air, earth, storms, one of the supreme deities of the pantheon. And he simply says her descent was her choice. So no, he will not help. The next is Nanna, the moon god, and in most iterations, Inanna's father, who is also not very helpful and says, let the underworld keep what they take. But Ninshebur tries one more, Enki, the god of wisdom and creation, and he finally steps in with an interesting choice of help. He creates 2 tiny genderless beings from the dirt underneath his fingernails. They are known as the Gala, which also seems to be the name for the demons that are in the underworld, but these 2 Gala get 2 specific names, Kurgara and Galator. He instructs them with, again, his wisdom here. It's very interesting to go to Ereshkigal and echo her cries, show sympathy. Do not demand, but if offered the opportunity, ask for the corpse back. This empathy defeating tyranny is a theme that we see in many other mythologies that will arise later in time. It's a really cool trope or concept. So they go down, and sure enough, Ereshkigal is in great agony. We're supposed to tie it to labor pains, but some iterations are just more about the constant grief or darkness or existential suffering that she might constantly be in. These 2 beings do what they're instructed. They mirror her pain, and she's moved by them. And so, yes, she offers them a gift. They request only Inanna's body. When they get to her body, they anoint it with the food of life and the water of life. And we have our first ever resurrection in recorded history, Inanna. So let's wrap up the story, and I'll tell you my 3 takeaways. Like all great hero journeys, it's not just about the call, the crossing of the threshold, the ordeal, the death, the resurrection. It's also about the return. If you want to understand this hero's journey better, I covered it in pretty good detail when we talk about Prometheus. But I think Inanna fits the hero's journey by definition perfectly all the way through. We could do it with all the comparisons, but we'll stick with Jesus. He doesn't just spend his 3 days in hell, which there's some really cool versions about, like preaching to the people that died in the flood, literally trying to get the keys to death and Hades before his what? His return, his ascension. And what is his ascension accomplishing? A substitution, an atonement. Well, that first happens with Inanna, but kind of backwards. The underworld agrees, fine, you gave her life, she can return, she can ascend, but no one returns without the debt that is owed, without a substitution. So the demons of Kur follow her as she's ascending through the underworld. These demons are ready to claim whoever she ordains to be her replacement, making sure that she does offer someone up before fully escaping. Here we get some tableaus as she ascends. First, she passes her loyal servant, Ninshebur. The servant is grieving, dressed in sackcloth. Inanna refuses to pick her to hand her over. The next tableau, we see her pass 2 of her sons. They seem to be grieving, and she passes them as well. But when she reaches the throne, of her husband, Dumuzi. He is not mourning. He sits there in luxury. He's wearing his finest robes. He is celebrating. Picture the scene. Inanna, as she emerges fully into the final height, her old palace throne room with her husband, who seems not at all affected by this great ordeal. She becomes enraged and simply says, "Take him." No exaggerating when I say that that moment has sparked thousands of years of scholarship and debate. Is it as simple as Inanna punishing her husband for not grieving for her? Is this instead a commentary on the fertility cycles? Dumuzi as the dying vegetation god? Is it about the consequences of hubris? Is it simply just part of the myth that explains seasonality? So later we learn that yes, Dumuzi takes her place, but he gets to switch every 6 months with his sister. Regardless, he's given to the underworld, and this establishes the annual cycle of death and rebirth. And it can go off in that direction. That's what's so cool about pantheon theologies, the intertwining. The story of Dumuzi's sister taking his place is wonderful. Some of the other Inanna myths or iterations, variations of even this story are so cool. In some, you have Inanna who creates the first spider just to design via the webs her garments. This is why some depictions of Inanna have her as the spider goddess. But again, it's a bit contradicting because we already have the goddess Utu, who is sometimes Inanna's sister and is the goddess associated with the spider and the creating of textiles and spinning and weaving. Sorry, I think I said sister. Inanna's daughter. And in some iterations, she's asking her daughter to use her powers to spin her a garment that will give her great favor when she goes to Erishkigal in the underworld. So again, I don't want to confuse things too much and show you every different lane this can go down, but these stories are so cool, so interconnected, and I just hope so much that you appreciated this little window into the story. Before we get to the takeaways, I've mentioned some of these comparisons. Let me just build that out a bit more, giving you some roads you can go down of interest on your own. I mentioned Persephone. Persephone's descent happens centuries later, but Inanna's story, which is earlier, is actually more psychologically complex, mainly because Inanna chooses her descent, where Persephone is forced. Then, of course, you have the Jesus story. Both narratives include a descent, a 3-day stay of being dead, and a resurrection, and a substitution. But where Jesus will be tied to salvation via this substitution, Inanna is about natural cycles and kingship and cosmic order, which again does play into what Yahweh is having his son do to defeat the powers of darkness of the underworld, to reestablish order with supreme will. Truly fascinating. Osiris is killed and resurrected, but it's to rule the dead. He serves below. When Inanna is resurrected, flight upward, ascension, serving life above. And there's others, but again, this whole thing is so wonderfully put on to the monomyth stages that Joseph Campbell gives us for the hero's journey. And I mentioned them earlier. I'm going to go through it super quick here. The most interesting thing about the layout of the stages is first the call. Think of Abraham being called by God later in life to go to adventure, to go on this journey. There's a call. But that's the most mysterious part. What is calling Inanna to descend? I hope you've been remembering to think about that this whole time. And then there's the crossing of the threshold. For Inanna, it's the 7 gates, which also happens to be the ordeal because instead of just crossing, at each one she loses a part of herself. That is her ordeal until she becomes nothing, no one, and thus can meet death, which is the next stage, followed by resurrection, and then the last stage of the return, the transformation. The other thing I want to leave a bit more open-ended for you is what is the change? Because the return is useless without transformation. Now, I haven't covered everything that happens after, but even from what I have covered, are you able to see what was once the ambitious, powerful, impulsive queen of the heavens in a new light? I think if you read the myth and you get more of the details, you'll see this clearly, and it's actually going to be part of my first takeaway for you. And if I were teaching a college course on this and wanted to do my fun little 3 takeaways, 3 points of order, my first one is that transformation requires surrender, not just accumulation of power. Inanna enters the underworld wearing 7 symbols of power, yet she leaves each behind. The descent strips her, literally and metaphorically, of status, identity, ego, authority, and maybe most damning of all, certainty. Real transformation demands a surrender of the things you cling to. We are often controlled by the things we desire, that the power, fame, fortune, whatever it may be that we accumulate, rules us more than we rule them, and thus to be in control, to get to change, to transform, to grow, often starts with giving those things up or changing how we think about them or our relation to them. The roles, expectations, persona, and order that we hold so dear, we have to hold more loosely or even fully relinquish. And I won't go on forever about the change and transformation that we do see after these events in Inanna, but she comes back respecting order. She enforces the rules of the underworld about substitution. Also, just going through this journey gives her credit. She comes back with more knowledge and more authority because she is someone who has been to the bottom and back. She has seen what is not supposed to be seen and returned. She understands that power without empathy is hollow. The consequence is unavoidable. 1,000 other things, really so packed with depth. But yes, we see a change, a transformation, an improvement in Inanna after having gone through this journey. The second lesson here, I think, that gets skipped over because it's not quite as sexy, is that about empathy, how it's more powerful than force itself. Picture Inanna hanging on the hook, her lifeless body. All the power of the great gods in heaven did nothing, only Enki, and only because of his wisdom, to use empathy. He doesn't send warriors, he doesn't threaten Erishkigal, he doesn't storm the gates. The best answer here was indeed a sympathetic ear, letting someone who must be going through intense suffering unload a bit of their burden, showing kindness to the very thing that caused you the hurt in the first place. The dark queen of the underworld was moved to allowing something she would not have allowed previously because of connection, sympathy, real empathy. I love this idea so much that compassion is older and more powerful than power itself. And this last one, again, I'm not pulling any new themes from this story, and this is a theme that I think because of the story and the copies of it has been well established, but it's still such a beautiful understanding and important concept, and it is this: what you fail to honor, for lack of a better term, will eventually require a price. The myth ends with Inanna resurrected. Like, that's the coolest thing ever, but it's not the final end. It can't be, because where is she resurrected? She's still in hell. I'm saying hell. That was not really the concept for them. She's in the underworld. She's not where she wants to be, but she cannot leave without a replacement. And I struggled with this because, again, the big point for Inanna's transformation is, again, her not tolerating the shallowness and immaturity of people in her relationships. That's what we see in all the tableaus, where she sees them mourning her until she gets to her husband. And there's a part of me that just looks at this cheaply, right? Oh, she's rewarding the people who are loyal to her and cursing the one that is not. Life extracts a price for negligence, not honoring what deserves your attention, like your relationships, your wife who's dead and stuck in the underworld, your responsibility, your grief, your boundaries, your truth. It all creates a debt that someday demands payment. And that's why I think if you don't look at it the way I did at first, kind of cheaply, and we get some hints in the text here, if you view her husband, Dumuzi, as someone that isn't just being immature, but doesn't have the emotional wherewithal, the tools, the resilience, maybe even to properly accept that his wife has died, right? We can just see him as a bad king in heaven that doesn't care. But what if he cares deeply, but he's unwilling to face it? Her sons are facing the pain. Her maidservant is facing the pain. They are mourning. They are in sackcloth. Is the husband wearing his nicest robes and celebrating, trying to distract himself, trying to move on, trying to ignore trauma, loss, tragedy, change? Well, guess what? You can't. The ones who embraced it, who faced it head on, they were protected. But he who put his head in the sand, metaphorically speaking, he gets his comeuppance. And it is to become the very thing he refused to look at. Now, you might think that's pulling at threads, but again, when you really get into comparative mythology, when you really look at the structures and themes of what ancient people who were just as alive and deep as we are were able to sew together and weave into these tales, I don't think it's a reach at all. I think most times we don't go deep enough into what these stories are here for. If you ignore your mental health long enough, there's a consequence. If you ignore your partner's needs long enough, there's a consequence. If you ignore truth long enough, there's going to be a consequence. The underworld symbolizes what we avoid. This is similar to the video I did on the purpose of the maze, the labyrinth. What the beast in the maze really represents, our shadow self that we must face. Then we can return and transform and gain. So all these things that we avoid constantly, like grief, honesty, vulnerability, consequence itself, they don't just go away when we avoid them. They get larger and more powerful. In this story, Dumuzi is the one that is unwilling to face what the rest of the world is already facing, and thus he is the one that pays the piper for it. So that, my friends, is the wonderful, captivating, deep, amazing story of the Queen of Heaven stripped naked, facing the darkness and death, facing the unknown, starting out ambitious and curious and ending cautious and wise and more powerful than ever before. We may not always get to choose what we descend down into, but if we remember some of the lessons from the Descent of Inanna, I think many of us can return much faster and much better than we would otherwise. This is the power of myth and storytelling, and taking the time to share it and learn from it and study it and apply it. So that's my encouragement for you today. Maybe you're ascending, maybe you're descending, maybe you're stuck on a meat hook in hell, but take Inanna's wisdom with you. Let go, listen deeply, show empathy, face what you've avoided, and remember that the underworld is not the end. The middle of the maze is not the end. It is a turning point, a catalyst for something greater. And that's it. Thanks so much for being here. I will see you Wednesday with a brand new video. And until then, keep sharing. Our Blaze tier gets a verbal call out at the end of each video, so a very special thanks to Decox, Dark Side of Delight Productions, James Geider, Lori, and Noëldivergent. Also, our Flame tier is up to 7 people. Your support here truly means so much. All other donors are Ember Tier and are listed in the description of each video. Thank you to each and every single one of you.